for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All stories on this recording are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story is about a mysterious woman, a legendary cursed jewel, and a night train from London to the French Riviera, ingredients for the perfect romance or the perfect crime. When the train stops, the jewel is missing, and the woman is found dead in her compartment. It's the perfect mystery, filled with passion, greed, deceit, and confusion. Is Hercule Poirot the perfect detective to solve it? I see, said Poirot. In that case, as you said before, he would not be likely to attempt to hold any communication with Madame Kettering. The little man fell silent for some time. Van Alden did not interrupt his meditation. Chapter 17. An aristocratic gentleman. You have been to the Riviera before, Georges, said Poirot to his valet the following morning. George was an intensely English, rather wooden-faced individual. Yes, sir. I was here 2 years ago when I was in the service of Lord Edward Frampton. And today, murmured his master, you are here with Hercule Poirot. How one mounts in the world. The valet made no reply to this observation. After a suitable pause, he asked, the brown lounge suit, sir? The wind is somewhat chilly today. There is a grease spot on the waistcoat, objected Poirot. A morceau of filet de sole à la Jeanette lighted there when I was lunching at the Ritz last Tuesday. There is no spot there now, sir, said George reproachfully. I have removed it. Très bien, said Poirot. I am pleased with you, Georges. Thank you, sir. There was a pause, and then Poirot murmured dreamily. Supposing, my good Georges, that you had been born in the same social sphere as your late master, Lord Edward Frampton, that, penniless yourself, you had married an extremely wealthy wife, but that wife proposed to divorce you, with excellent reasons, what would you do about it? I should endeavour, sir, replied George, to make her change her mind. By peaceful or by forcible methods? George looked shocked. You will excuse me, sir, he said, but a gentleman of the aristocracy would not behave like a Whitechapel coster. He would not do anything low. Would he not, Georges? I wonder now. Well, perhaps you are right. There was a knock on the door. George went to it and opened it a discreet inch or two. A low murmured colloquy went on, and then the valet returned to Poirot. A note, sir. Poirot took it. It was from M. Co., the commissary of police. We are about to interrogate the Comte de la Roche. The juge d'instruction begs that you will be present. Quickly, my suit, Georges. I must hasten myself. A quarter of an hour later, spick and span in his brown suit, Poirot entered the examining magistrate's room. M. Co. was already there, and both he and M. Carriage greeted Poirot with polite empressement. The affair is somewhat discouraging, murmured M. Co. It appears that the Comte arrived in Nice the day before the murder. If that is true, it will settle your affair nicely for you, responded Poirot. M. Carriage cleared his throat. We must not accept this alibi without very cautious inquiry, he declared. He struck the bell upon the table with his hand. In another minute a tall dark man, exquisitely dressed, with a somewhat haughty cast of countenance, entered the room. So very aristocratic-looking was the Count, that it would have seemed sheer heresy even to whisper that his father had been an obscure corn chandler in Nantes, which, as a matter of fact, was the case. Looking at him, one would have been prepared to swear that innumerable ancestors of his must have perished by the guillotine in the French Revolution. I am here, gentlemen, said the Count haughtily. May I ask why you wish to see me? Pray be seated, Monsieur le Comte, said the examining magistrate politely. It is the affair of the death of Madame Kettering that we are investigating. The death of Madame Kettering? I do not understand. You were acquainted with the lady, I believe, Monsieur le Comte. Certainly I was acquainted with her. What has that to do with the matter? Sticking an eyeglass in his eye, he looked coldly round the room, his glance resting longest on Poirot, who was gazing at him with a kind of simple, innocent admiration which was most pleasing to the Count's vanity. Carriage leaned back in his chair and cleared his throat. "You do not perhaps know, Monsieur le Comte," he paused, "that Madame Kettering was murdered." "Murdered? Mon Dieu, how terrible!" The surprise and the sorrow were excellently done, so well done, indeed, as to seem wholly natural. "Madame Kettering was strangled between Paris and Lyons," continued Carriage, "and her jewels were stolen." "It is iniquitous," cried the Count warmly. "The police should do something about these train bandits. Nowadays no one is safe." "In Madame's handbag," continued the judge, "we found a letter to her from you. She had, it seemed, arranged to meet you?" The Count shrugged his shoulders and spread out his hands. "Of what use are concealments?" he said frankly. "We are all men of the world. Privately and between ourselves, I admit the affair." "You met her in Paris and travelled down with her, I believe?" said Carriage. "That was the original arrangement, but by Madame's wish it was changed. I was to meet her at Hyères." "You did not meet her on the train at the Gare de Lyon on the evening of the 14th? "On the contrary, I arrived in Nice on the morning of that day, so what you suggest is impossible." Quite so," said Carriage. "As a matter of form, you would perhaps give me an account of your movements during the evening and night of the 14th. The Count reflected for a minute. "I dined in Monte Carlo at the Café de Paris. Afterwards I went to the Le Sporting. I won a few thousand francs." He shrugged his shoulders. "I returned home at perhaps 1 o'clock. "Pardon me, monsieur, but how did you return home?" "In my own two-seater car." "No one was with you?" "No one." "You could produce witnesses in support of this statement?" "Doubtless many of my friends saw me there that evening. I dined alone." "Your servant admitted you on your return to your villa?" "I let myself in with my own latch key." "Ah," murmured the magistrate. Again he struck the bell on the table with his hand. The door opened, and a messenger appeared. "Bring in the maid, Mason," said Carriage. "Very good, Monsieur le Juge." Ada Mason was brought in. "Will you be so good, mademoiselle, as to look at this gentleman? To the best of your ability, was it he who entered your mistress's compartment in Paris?" The woman looked long and searchingly at the Count, who was, Poirot fancied, rather uneasy under this scrutiny. "I could not say, sir, I am sure," said Mason at last. "It might be and again it might not. Seeing as how I only saw his back, it's hard to say. I rather think it was the gentleman." "But you are not sure?" "No," said Mason unwillingly, "no, I am not sure." "You have seen this gentleman before in Curzon Street?" Mason shook her head. "I should not be likely to see any visitors that come to Curzon Street," she explained, "unless they were staying in the house." "Very well, that will do," said the examining magistrate sharply. Evidently he was disappointed. "One moment," said Poirot. "There is a question I would like to put to mademoiselle, if I may." "Certainly, Poirot, certainly, by all means." Poirot addressed himself to the maid. "What happened to the tickets?" "The tickets, sir?" "Yes, the tickets from London to Nice. Did you or your mistress have them?" "The mistress had her own Pullman ticket, sir, the others were in my charge." "What happened to them?" "I gave them to the conductor on the French train, sir. He said it was usual." "I hope I did right, sir?" "Oh, quite right, quite right. A mere matter of detail." Both Co and the examining magistrate looked at him curiously. Mason stood uncertainly for a minute or two, and then the magistrate gave her a brief nod of dismissal, and she went out. Poirot scribbled something on a scrap of paper and handed it across to Carriage. The latter read it and his brow cleared. "Well, gentlemen," demanded the Count haughtily, "am I to be detained further?" Assuredly not," Carriage hastened to say, with a great deal of amiability. Everything is now cleared up as regards your own position in this affair. Naturally, in view of Madame's letter, we were bound to question you." The Count rose, picked up his handsome stick from the corner, and, with rather a curt bow, left the room. "And that is that," said M. Carriage. "You were quite right, M. Poirot. Much better to let him feel he is not suspected. 2 of my men will shadow him night and day, and at the same time we will go into the question of the alibi. It seems to me rather, a fluid one." "Possibly," agreed Poirot thoughtfully. "I asked M. Kettering to come here this morning," continued the magistrate, "though really I doubt if we have much to ask him, but there are 1 or 2 suspicious circumstances." He paused, rubbing his nose. "Such as?" asked Poirot. "Well, the magistrate coughed. This lady with whom he is said to be travelling, Mademoiselle Mirel. She is staying at one hotel and he at another. That strikes me, as rather odd." "It looks," said M. As though they were being careful." "Exactly," said M. Carriage triumphantly, "and what should they have to be careful about?" "An excessive caution is suspicious, eh?" said Poirot. "Precisement." "We might, I think," murmured Poirot, "ask M. Kettering 1 or 2 questions." The magistrate gave instructions. A moment or 2 later, Derek Kettering, debonair as ever, entered the room. "Good morning, monsieur," said the judge politely. "Good morning," said Derek Kettering curtly. "You sent for me. Has anything fresh turned up?" "Pray sit down, monsieur." Derek took a seat and flung his hat and stick on the table. "Well?" he asked impatiently. "We have, so far, no fresh data," said M. Carriage cautiously. "That's very interesting," said Derek dryly. "Did you send for me here in order to tell me that?" "We naturally thought, monsieur, that you would like to be informed of the progress of the case," said the magistrate severely. "Even if the progress was non-existent. We also wish to ask you a few questions." "Ask away." "You are quite sure that you neither saw nor spoke with your wife on the train?" "I've answered that already." "I did not." "You had, no doubt, your reasons." Derek stared at him suspiciously. "I did not know she was on the train," he explained, spacing his words elaborately, as though to someone dull of intellect. "That is what you say, yes," murmured M. Carriage. A frown suffused Derek's face. "I should like to know what you're driving at. Do you know what I think, M. Carriage?" "What do you think, monsieur?" "I think the French police are vastly overrated. Surely you must have some data as to these gangs of train robbers. It's outrageous that such a thing could happen on a train de luxe like that, and that the French police should be helpless to deal with the matter." "We are dealing with it, monsieur, never fear." "Madame Kettering, I understand, did not leave a will," interposed Poirot suddenly. His fingertips were joined together, and he was looking intently at the ceiling. "I don't think she ever made one," said Kettering. "Why?" "It is a very pretty little fortune that you inherit there," said Poirot. "A very pretty little fortune." Although his eyes were still on the ceiling, he managed to see the dark flush that rose to Derek Kettering's face. "What do you mean, and who are you?" Poirot gently uncrossed his knees, withdrew his gaze from the ceiling, and looked the young man full in the face. "My name is Hercule Poirot," he said quietly, "and I am probably the greatest detective in the world. You are quite sure that you did not see or speak to your wife on that train? What are you getting at? Do you mean to insinuate that I killed her?" He laughed suddenly. "I mustn't lose my temper, it's too palpably absurd. Why, if I killed her I should have had no need to steal her jewels, would I?" "That is true," murmured Poirot, with a rather crestfallen air. "I did not think of that." "If ever there were a clear case of murder and robbery, this is it," said Derek Kettering. "Poor Ruth, it was those damned rubies did for her. It must have got about she had them with her. There has been murder done for those same stones before now, I believe." Poirot sat up suddenly in his chair. A very faint green light glowed in his eyes. He looked extraordinarily like a sleek, well-fed cat. "One more question, M. Kettering," he said. "Will you give me the date when you last saw your wife?" "Let me see," Kettering reflected. "It must have been over 3 weeks ago. I am afraid I can't give you the date exactly." "No matter," said Poirot dryly, "that is all I wanted to know." "Well," said Derek Kettering impatiently, "anything further?" He looked towards M. Carriage. The latter sought inspiration from Poirot, and received it in a very faint shake of the head. "No, M. Kettering," he said politely, "no, I do not think we need trouble you any further. I wish you good morning." "Good morning," said Kettering. He went out, banging the door behind him. Poirot leaned forward and spoke sharply, as soon as the young man was out of the room. "Tell me," he said peremptorily, "when did you speak of these rubies to M. Kettering?" "I have not spoken of them," said M. Carriage. "It was only yesterday afternoon that we learnt about them from M. Van Alden." "Yes, but there was a mention of them in the Comte's letter." M. Carriage looked pained. "Naturally I did not speak of that letter to M. Kettering," he said in a shocked voice. "It would have been most indiscreet at the present juncture of affairs." Poirot leaned forward and tapped the table. "Then how did he know about them?" he demanded softly. "Madame could not have told him, for he has not seen her for 3 weeks. It seems unlikely that either M. Van Alden or his secretary would have mentioned them. Their interviews with him have been on entirely different lines, and there has not been any hint or reference to them in the newspapers." He got up and took his hat and stick. "And yet," he murmured to himself, "our gentleman knows all about them. I wonder now, yes, I wonder." Chapter 18 Derek Lunches. Derek Kettering went straight to the Negresco, where he ordered a couple of cocktails and disposed of them rapidly. Then he stared moodily out over the dazzling blue sea. He noted the passers-by mechanically, a damned dull crowd, badly dressed, and painfully uninteresting. One hardly ever saw anything worthwhile nowadays. Then he corrected this last impression rapidly, as a woman placed herself at a table a little distance away from him. She was wearing a marvelous confection of orange and black, with a little hat that shaded her face. He ordered a third cocktail. Again he stared out to sea, and then suddenly he started. A well-known perfume assailed his nostrils, and he looked up to see the orange and black lady standing beside him. He saw her face now, and recognized her. It was Mireille. She was smiling that insolent, seductive smile he knew so well. "Derek," she murmured. "You are pleased to see me, no?" She dropped into a seat the other side of the table. "But welcome me, then, stupid one," she mocked. "This is an unexpected pleasure," said Derek. "When did you leave London?" She shrugged her shoulders. "A day or 2 ago." "And the Parthenon?" "I have, how do you say it? Given them the chuck." "Really? You are not very amiable, Derek. Do you expect me to be?" Mireille lit a cigarette and puffed at it for a few minutes before saying, "You think, perhaps, that it is not prudent so soon?" Derek stared at her, then he shrugged his shoulders, and remarked formally, "You are lunching here?" "Mais oui. I am lunching with you." "I am extremely sorry," said Derek. "I have a very important engagement." "Mon Dieu! But you men are like children," exclaimed the dancer. "But yes, it is the spoilt child that you act to me ever since that day in London when you flung yourself out of my flat, you sulk. Ah. Mais c'est ennui." "My dear girl," said Derek, "I really don't know what you are talking about. We agreed in London that rats desert a sinking ship, that is all that there is to be said." In spite of his careless words, his face looked haggard and strained. Mireille leaned forward suddenly. "You cannot deceive me," she murmured. I know what you have done for me." He looked up at her sharply. Some undercurrent in her voice arrested his attention. She nodded her head at him. "Ah. Have no fear, I am discreet. You are magnificent. You have a superb courage, but, all the same, it was I who gave you the idea that day, when I said to you in London that accidents sometimes happened. And you are not in danger? The police do not suspect you? What the devil? Hush. She held up a slim olive hand with one big emerald on the little finger. You are right, I should not have spoken so in a public place. We will not speak of the matter again, but our troubles are ended, our life together will be wonderful, wonderful. Derek laughed suddenly, a harsh, disagreeable laugh. So the rats come back, do they? 2 million makes a difference, of course it does. I ought to have known that. He laughed again. You will help me to spend that 2 million, won't you, Mirelle? You know how, no woman better. He laughed again. Hush! Cried the dancer. What is the matter with you, Derek? See, people are turning to stare at you. Me? I will tell you what is the matter. I have finished with you, Mirelle. Do you hear? Finished. Mirelle did not take it as he expected her to do. She looked at him for a minute or two, and then she smiled softly. But what a child! You are angry, you are sore, and all because I am practical. Did I not always tell you that I adored you? She leaned forward. But I know you, Derek. Look at Missy, it is Mirelle who speaks to you. You cannot live without her, you know it. I loved you before, I will love you 100 times more now. I will make life wonderful for you, but wonderful. There is no one like Mirelle. Her eyes burned into his. She saw him grow pale and draw in his breath, and she smiled to herself contentedly. She knew her own magic and power over men. That is settled, she said softly, and gave a little laugh. And now? Derek, will you give me lunch? No. He drew in his breath sharply and rose to his feet. I am sorry, but I told you I have got an engagement. You are lunching with someone else? Bah! I don't believe it. I am lunching with that lady over there. He crossed abruptly to where a lady in white had just come up the steps. He addressed her a little breathlessly. Miss Grey, will you have lunch with me? You met me at Lady Tamplin's, if you remember. Catherine looked at him for a minute or two with those thoughtful grey eyes that said so much. Thank you, she said, after a moment's pause, I should like to very much. Chapter 19 An Unexpected Visitor. The Comte de la Roche had just finished déjeuner, consisting of an omelette fines herbe, an entrecôte béarnaise, and a Savarin au rhum. Wiping his fine black moustache delicately with his table napkin, the Comte rose from the table. He passed through the salon of the villa, noting with appreciation the few objets d'art which were carelessly scattered about: the Louis XV snuff box, the satin shoe worn by Marie Antoinette, and the other historic trifles were part of the Comte's mise en scène. They were, he would explain to his fair visitors, heirlooms in his family. Passing through onto the terrace, the Comte looked out on the Mediterranean with an unseeing eye. He was in no mood for appreciating the beauties of scenery. A fully matured scheme had been rudely brought to naught, and his plans had to be cast afresh. Stretching himself out in a basket chair, a cigarette held between his white fingers, the Comte pondered deeply. If we only knew, said the millionaire thoughtfully, what decision Ruth came to. It might have been any of half a dozen. She might have meant to leave the train at Paris and cable to me. She may have meant to have gone on to the south of France and have an explanation with the Count there. We are in the dark, absolutely in the dark. But we have the maid's word for it that she was both startled and dismayed at the Count's appearance at the station in Paris. That was clearly not part of the preconceived plan. You agree with me, Knighton? The secretary started. I beg your pardon, Mr. Van Alden. I was not listening. Daydreaming, eh? Said Van Alden. That's not like you. I believe that girl has bowled you over. Knighton blushed. She is a remarkably nice girl, said Van Alden thoughtfully, very nice. Did you happen to notice her eyes? Any man, said Knighton, would be bound to notice her eyes. Chapter 21 At the tennis. Several days had elapsed. Catherine had been for a walk by herself one morning, and came back to find Lennox grinning at her expectantly. "Your young man has been ringing you up, Catherine." "Who do you call my young man?" "A new one, Rufus Van Alden's secretary. You seem to have made rather an impression there. You are becoming a serious breaker of hearts, Catherine. First Derek Kettering, and now this young Knighton. The funny thing is, that I remember him quite well. He was in Mother's War Hospital that she ran out here. I was only a kid of about 8 at the time." "Was he badly wounded?" "Shot in the leg, if I remember rightly, rather a nasty business. I think the doctors messed it up a bit. They said he wouldn't limp or anything, but when he left here he was still completely dot and go one." Lady Tamplin came out and joined them. "Have you been telling Catherine about Major Knighton?" she asked. "Such a dear fellow. Just at first I didn't remember Himone had so many, but now it all comes back." "He was a bit too unimportant to be remembered before," said Lennox. "Now that he is a secretary to an American millionaire, it is a very different matter." "Darling," said Lady Tamplin in her vague reproachful voice. "What did Major Knighton ring up about?" inquired Catherine. "He asked if you would like to go to the tennis this afternoon. If so, he would call for you in a car. Mother and I accepted for you with empressement. Whilst you dally with a millionaire's secretary, you might give me a chance with the millionaire, Catherine. He is about 60, I suppose, so that he will be looking about for a nice sweet young thing like me." "I should like to meet Mr. Van Alden," said Lady Tamplin earnestly. "One has heard so much of him. Those fine rugged figures of the Western world," she broke off. "So fascinating," she murmured. "Major Knighton was very particular to say it was Mr. Van Alden's invitation," said Lennox. "He said it so often that I began to smell a rat. You and Knighton would make a very nice pair, Catherine. Bless you, my children." Catherine laughed, and went upstairs to change her clothes. Knighton arrived soon after lunch and endured manfully Lady Tamplin's transports of recognition. When they were driving together towards Cannes, he remarked to Catherine, "Lady Tamplin has changed wonderfully little." "In manner or appearance?" "Both. She must be, I suppose, well over 40, but she is a remarkably beautiful woman still." "She is," agreed Catherine. "I am very glad that you could come today," went on Knighton. Poirot is going to be there also. What an extraordinary little man he is. Do you know him well, Miss Grey?" Catherine shook her head. "I met him on the train on the way here. I was reading a detective novel, and I happened to say something about such things not happening in real life. Of course, I had no idea of who he was." "He is a very remarkable person," said Knighton slowly, "and has done some very remarkable things. He has a kind of genius for going to the root of the matter, and right up to the end no one has any idea of what he is really thinking. I remember I was staying at a house in Yorkshire, and Lady Clanriven's jewels were stolen. It seemed at first to be a simple robbery, but it completely baffled the local police. I wanted them to call in Hercule Poirot, and said he was the only man who could help them, but they pinned their faith to Scotland Yard." "And what happened?" said Catherine curiously. "The jewels were never recovered," said Knighton dryly. "You really do believe in him?" "I do indeed. The Comte de la Roche is a pretty wily customer. He has wriggled out of most things. But I think he has met his match in Hercule Poirot." "The Comte de la Roche," said Catherine thoughtfully, "so you really think he did it?" "Of course." Knighton looked at her in astonishment. "Don't you?" "Oh yes," said Catherine hastily, "that is, I mean, if it was not just an ordinary train robbery." "It might be, of course," agreed the other, "but it seems to me that the Comte de la Roche fits into this business particularly well. And yet he has an alibi." "Oh, alibis." Knighton laughed, his face broke into his attractive boyish smile. "You confess that you read detective stories, Miss Grey. You must know that anyone who has a perfect alibi is always open to grave suspicion. Do you think that real life is like that?" asked Catherine, smiling. "Why not? Fiction is founded on fact. But is rather superior to it, suggested Catherine. Perhaps. Anyway, if I was a criminal I should not like to have Hercule Poirot on my track, no more should I, said Catherine, and laughed. They were met on arrival by Poirot. As the day was warm he was attired in a white duck suit, with a white camellia in his buttonhole. Bonjour, mademoiselle, said Poirot. I look very English, do I not? You look wonderful, said Catherine tactfully. You mock yourself at me, said Poirot genially, but no matter. Papa Poirot, he always laughs the last. Where is Mr. Van Alden? Asked Knighton. He will meet us at our seats. To tell you the truth, my friend, he is not too well pleased with me. Oh, those Americans, the repose, the calm, they know it not. Mr. Van Alden, he would that I fly myself in the pursuit of criminals through all the byways of Nice. I should have thought myself that it would not have been a bad plan, observed Knighton. You are wrong, said Poirot, in these matters one needs not energy but finesse. At the tennis one meets every one. That is so important. Ah, there is Mr. Kettering. Derek came abruptly up to them. He looked reckless and angry, as though something had arisen to upset him. He and Knighton greeted each other with some frigidity. Poirot alone seemed unconscious of any sense of strain, and chatted pleasantly in a laudable attempt to put everyone at his ease. He paid little compliments. It is amazing, M. Kettering, how well you speak the French, he observed, so well that you could be taken for a Frenchman if you chose. That is a very rare accomplishment among Englishmen. I wish I did, said Catherine. I am only too well aware that my French is of a painfully British order. They reached their seats and sat down, and almost immediately Knighton perceived his employer signalling to him from the other end of the court, and went off to speak to him. I approve of that young man, said Poirot, sending a beaming smile after the departing secretary, and you, mademoiselle? I like him very much. And you, M. Kettering? Some quick rejoinder was springing to Derek's lips, but he checked it as though something in the little Belgian's twinkling eyes had made him suddenly alert. He spoke carefully, choosing his words. Knighton is a very good fellow, he said. Just for a moment Catherine fancied that Poirot looked disappointed. He is a great admirer of yours, M. Poirot, she said, and she related some of the things that Knighton had said. It amused her to see the little man plume himself like a bird, thrusting out his chest, and assuming an air of mock modesty that would have deceived no one. That reminds me, mademoiselle, he said suddenly, I have a little matter of business I have to speak to you about. When you were sitting talking to that poor lady in the train, I think you must have dropped a cigarette case. Catherine looked rather astonished. I don't think so, she said. Poirot drew from his pocket a cigarette case of soft blue leather, with the initial, K, on it in gold. No, that is not mine, Catherine said. Ah, 1,000 apologies. It was doubtless Madame's own. K, of course, stands for Kettering. We were doubtful, because she had another cigarette case in her bag, and it seemed odd that she should have two. He turned to Derek suddenly. You do not know, I suppose, whether this was your wife's case or not? Derek seemed momentarily taken aback. He stammered a little in his reply. I don't know. I suppose so. It is not yours by any chance? Certainly not. If it were mine it would hardly have been in my wife's possession. Poirot looked more ingenuous and childlike than ever. I thought perhaps you might have dropped it when you were in your wife's compartment, he explained guilelessly. I never was there. I have already told the police that 12 times. 1,000 pardons, said Poirot, with his most apologetic air. It was mademoiselle here who mentioned having seen you going in. He stopped with an air of embarrassment. Catherine looked at Derek. His face had gone rather white, but perhaps that was her fancy. His laugh, when it came, was natural enough. You made a mistake, Miss Gray, he said easily. From what the police have told me, I gather that my own compartment was only a door or two away from that of my wife's, though I never suspected the fact at the time. You must have seen me going into my own compartment. He got up quickly as he saw Van Alden and Knighton approaching. I'm going to leave you now, he announced. I can't stand my father-in-law at any price. Van Alden greeted Catherine very courteously, but was clearly in a bad humor. You seem fond of watching tennis, M. Poirot, he growled. It is a pleasure to me, yes, cried Poirot placidly. It is as well you are in France, said Van Alden. We are made of sterner stuff in the States. Business comes before pleasure there. Poirot did not take offense, indeed, he smiled gently and confidingly at the irate millionaire. Do not enrage yourself, I beg of you. Everyone has his own methods. I have always found it a delightful and pleasing idea to combine business and pleasure together. He glanced at the other two. They were deep in conversation, absorbed in each other. Poirot nodded his head in satisfaction, and then leant towards the millionaire, lowering his voice as he did so. It is not only for pleasure that I am here, M. Van Alden. Observe just opposite us that tall old Mante one with the yellow face and the venerable beard. Well, what of him? That, Poirot said, is M. Papopoulos. A Greek, eh? As you say, a Greek, he is a dealer in antiques of worldwide reputation. He has a small shop in Paris, and he is suspected by the police of being something more. What? A receiver of stolen goods, especially jewels. There is nothing as to the recutting and resetting of gems that he does not know. He deals with the highest in Europe and with the lowest of the riffraff of the underworld. Van Alden was looking at Poirot with suddenly awakened attention. Well? He demanded, a new note in his voice. I ask myself, said Poirot, Hercule Poirot, he thumped himself dramatically on the chest, ask myself why is M. Papopoulos suddenly come to Nice? Van Alden was impressed. For a moment he had doubted Poirot and suspected the little man of being past his job, a poseur only. Now, in a moment, he switched back to his original opinion. He looked straight at the little detective. I must apologize to you, M. Poirot. Poirot waved the apology aside with an extravagant gesture. Bah! He cried, all that is of no importance. Now listen, M. Van Alden, I have news for you. The millionaire looked sharply at him, all his interest aroused. Poirot nodded. It is as I say. You will be interested. As you know, M. Van Alden, the Comte de la Roche has been under surveillance ever since his interview with the Juge d'instruction. The day after that, during his absence, the Villa Marina was searched by the police. Well, said Van Alden, did they find anything? I bet they didn't. Poirot made him a little bow. Your acumen is not at fault, M. Van Alden. They found nothing of an incriminating nature. It was not to be expected that they would. The Comte de la Roche, as your expressive idiom has it, was not born on the preceding day. He is an astute gentleman with great experience. Well, go on, growled Van Alden. It may be, of course, that the Comte had nothing of a compromising nature to conceal. But we must not neglect the possibility. If, then, he has something to conceal, where is it? Not in his house. The police searched thoroughly. Not on his person, for he knows that he is liable to arrest at any minute. There remains his car. As I say, he was under surveillance. He was followed on that day to Monte Carlo. From there he went by road to Mentone, driving himself. His car is a very powerful one, it outdistanced his pursuers, and for about a quarter of an hour they completely lost sight of him. And during that time you think he concealed something by the roadside? Asked Van Alden, keenly interested. By the roadside? No. Ça n'est pas pratique. But listen now I have made a little suggestion to M. Carriage. He is graciously pleased to approve of it. In each bureau de poste in the neighborhood it has been seen to that there is someone who knows the Comte de la Roche by sight. Because, you see, monsieur, the best way of hiding a thing is by sending it away by the post. Well? Demanded Van Alden, his face was keenly alight with interest and expectation. Well, Voilà. With a dramatic flourish, Poirot drew out from his pocket a loosely wrapped brown paper package from which the string had been removed. During that quarter of an hour's interval, our good gentleman mailed this. The address? Asked the other sharply. Poirot nodded his head. Might have told us something, but unfortunately it does not. The package was addressed to one of these little newspaper shops in Paris where letters and parcels are kept until called for on payment of a small commission. Yes, but what is inside? Demanded Van Alden impatiently. Poirot unwrapped the brown paper and disclosed a square cardboard box. He looked round him. It is a good moment, he said quietly. All eyes are on the tennis. Look, monsieur. He lifted the lid of the box for the fraction of a second. An exclamation of utter astonishment came from the millionaire. His face turned as white as chalk. My God! He breathed, the rubies. He sat for a minute as though dazed. Poirot restored the box to his pocket and beamed placidly. Then suddenly the millionaire seemed to come out of his trance. He leaned across to Poirot and wrung his hand so heartily that the little man winced with pain. This is great, said Van Alden. Great. You are the goods, M. Poirot. Once and for all, you are the goods. It is nothing, said Poirot modestly. Order, method, being prepared. For eventualities beforehand, that is all there is to it. And now, I suppose, the Comte de la Roche has been arrested. Continued Van Alden eagerly. No, said Poirot. A look of utter astonishment came over Van Alden's face. But why? What more do you want? The Comte's alibi is still unshaken. But that is nonsense. Yes, said Poirot, I rather think it is nonsense, but unfortunately we have to prove it so. In the meantime he will slip through your fingers. Poirot shook his head very energetically. No, he said, he will not do that. The one thing the Comte cannot afford to sacrifice is his social position. At all costs he must stop and brazen it out. Van Alden was still dissatisfied. But I don't see. Poirot raised a hand. Grant me a little moment, monsieur. Me, I have a little idea. Many people have mocked themselves at the little ideas of Hercule Poirot and they have been wrong. Well, said Van Alden, go ahead. What is this little idea? Poirot paused for a moment and then he said, I will call upon you at your hotel at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Until then, say nothing to anyone. Chapter 22 M. Papopoulos breakfasts. M. Papopoulos was at breakfast. Opposite him sat his daughter, Zia. There was a knock at the sitting-room door, and a chasseur entered with a card which he brought to Mr. Papopoulos. The latter scrutinized it, raised his eyebrows, and passed it over to his daughter. Ah, said M. Papopoulos, scratching his left ear thoughtfully, Hercule Poirot. I wonder now. Father and daughter looked at each other. I saw him yesterday at the tennis, said M. Papopoulos. Zia, I hardly like this. He was very useful to you once, his daughter reminded him. That is true, acknowledged M. Papopoulos, also he has retired from active work, so I hear. These interchanges between father and daughter had passed in their own language. Now M. Papopoulos turned to the chasseur and said in French, Faites-moi ci, monsieur. A few minutes later Hercule Poirot, exquisitely attired, and swinging a cane with a jaunty air, entered the room. My dear M. Papopoulos. My dear M. Poirot. And Mademoiselle Zia. Poirot swept her a low bow. You will excuse us going on with our breakfast, said M. Papopoulos, pouring himself out another cup of coffee. Your call is, ahem, a little early. It is scandalous, said Poirot, but see you, I am pressed. Ah, murmured M. Papopoulos, you are on an affair then? A very serious affair, said Poirot, the death of Madame Kettering. Let me see, M. Papopoulos looked innocently up at the ceiling. That was the lady who died on the blue train, was it not? I saw a mention of it in the papers, but there was no suggestion of foul play. In the interests of justice, said Poirot, it was thought best to suppress that fact. There was a pause. And in what way can I assist you, M. Poirot? Asked the dealer politely. Voilà, said Poirot, I shall come to the point. He took from his pocket the same box that he had displayed at Cannes, and opening it, he took out the rubies and pushed them across the table to Popopoulos. Although Poirot was watching him narrowly, not a muscle of the old man's face moved. He took up the jewels and examined them with a kind of detached interest, then he looked across at the detective inquiringly. Superb, are they not? Asked Poirot. Quite excellent, said M. Popopoulos. How much should you say they are worth? The Greek's face quivered a little. Is it really necessary to tell you, M. Poirot? He asked. You are shrewd, M. Popopoulos. No, it is not. They are not, for instance, worth $500,000. Popopoulos laughed, and Poirot joined with him. As an imitation, said Popopoulos, handing them back to Poirot, they are, as I said, quite excellent. Would it be indiscreet to ask, M. Poirot, where you came across them? Not at all, said Poirot, I have no objection to telling an old friend like yourself. They were in the possession of the Comte de la Roche. M. Popopoulos' eyebrows lifted themselves eloquently. Indeed, he murmured. Poirot leant forward and assumed his most innocent and beguiling air. M. Popopoulos, he said, I am going to lay my cards upon the table. The original of these jewels was stolen from Madame Kettering on the blue train. Now I will say to you first this, I am not concerned with the recovery of these jewels. That is the affair of the police. I am working not for the police but for M. Van Alden. I want to lay hands on the man who killed Madame Kettering. I am interested in the jewels only in so far as they may lead me to the man. You understand? The last two words were uttered with great significance. M. Popopoulos, his face quite unmoved, said quietly. Go on. It seems to me probable, monsieur, that the jewels will change hands in Nice may already have done so. Ah, said M. Popopoulos. He sipped his coffee reflectively, and looked a shade more noble and patriarchal than usual. I say to myself, continued Poirot, with animation, what good fortune. My old friend, M. Popopoulos, is in Nice. He will aid me. And how do you think I can aid you? Inquired M. Popopoulos coldly. I said to myself, without doubt M. Popopoulos is in Nice on business. Not at all, said M. Popopoulos, I am here for my health by the doctor's orders. He coughed hollowly. I am desolated to hear it, replied Poirot, with somewhat insincere sympathy. But to continue. When a Russian Grand Duke, an Austrian Archduchess, or an Italian prince wish to dispose of their family jewels, to whom do they go? To M. Popopoulos, is it not? He who is famous all over the world for the discretion with which he arranges these things. The other bowed. You flatter me. It is a great thing, discretion, mused Poirot, and was rewarded by the fleeting smile which passed across the Greek's face. I, too, can be discreet. The eyes of the two men met. Then Poirot went on speaking very slowly, and obviously picking his words with care. I say to myself, this, if these jewels have changed hands in Nice, M. Popopoulos would have heard of it. He has knowledge of all that passes in the jewel world. Ah, said M. Popopoulos, and helped himself to a croissant. The police, you understand, said M. Poirot, do not enter into the matter. It is a personal affair. One hears rumors, admitted M. Popopoulos cautiously. Such as? Prompted Poirot. Is there any reason why I should pass them on? Yes, said Poirot, I think there is. You may remember, M. Popopoulos, that 17 years ago there was a certain article in your hands, left there as security by a very, prominent person. It was in your keeping and it unaccountably disappeared. You were, if I may use the English expression, in the soup. His eyes came gently round to the girl. She had pushed her cup and plate aside, and with both elbows on the table and her chin resting on her hands was listening eagerly. Still keeping an eye on her, he went on. I am in Paris at the time. You send for me. You place yourself in my hands. If I restore to you that article, you say I shall earn your undying gratitude. Eh bien. I did restore it to you. A long sigh came from M. Papopoulos. It was the most unpleasant moment of my career, he murmured. 17 years is a long time, said Poirot thoughtfully, but I believe that I am right in saying, monsieur, that your race does not forget. A Greek? Murmured Papopoulos, with an ironical smile. It was not as a Greek I meant, said Poirot. There was a silence, and then the old man drew himself up proudly. You are right, M. Poirot, he said quietly. I am a Jew. And, as you say, our race does not forget. You will aid me then? As regards the jewels, monsieur, I can do nothing. The old man, as Poirot had done just now, picked his words carefully. I know nothing. I have heard nothing. But I can perhaps do you a good turn, that is, if you are interested in racing. Under certain circumstances I might be, said Poirot, eyeing him steadily. There is a horse running at Longchamps that would, I think, repay attention. I cannot say for certain, you understand, this news passed through so many hands. He stopped, fixing Poirot with his eye, as though to make sure that the latter was comprehending him. Perfectly, perfectly, said Poirot, nodding. The name of the horse, said M. Papopoulos, leaning back and joining the tips of his fingers together, is the Marquis. I think, but I am not sure, that it is an English horse, Zia? I think so too, said the girl. Poirot got up briskly. I thank you, monsieur, he said. It is a great thing to have what the English call a tip from the stable. Au revoir, monsieur, and many thanks. He turned to the girl. Au revoir, Mademoiselle Zia. It seems to me but yesterday that I saw you in Paris. One would say that 2 years had passed at most. There is a difference between 16 and 33, said Zia ruefully. Not in your case, declared Poirot gallantly. You and your father will perhaps dine with me one night. We shall be delighted, replied Zia. Then we will arrange it, declared Poirot, and now je m'y sauve. Poirot walked along the street humming a little tune to himself. He twirled his stick with a jaunty air. Once or twice he smiled to himself quietly. He turned into the first bureau de poste he came to and sent off a telegram. He took some time in wording it, but it was in code and he had to call upon his memory. It purported to deal with a missing scarf pin, and was addressed to Inspector Japp, Scotland Yard. Decoded, it was short and to the point. Wire me everything known about man whose sobriquet is the Marquis. Chapter 23, A New Theory. It was exactly 11 o'clock when Poirot presented himself at Van Alden's hotel. He found the millionaire alone. You are punctual, M. Poirot, he said, with a smile, as he rose to greet the detective. I am always punctual, said Poirot. The exactitude always do I observe it. Without order and method. He broke off. Ah, but it is possible that I have said these things to you before. Let us come at once to the object of my visit. Your little idea? Yes, my little idea. Poirot smiled. First of all, monsieur, I should like to interview once more the maid, Ada Mason. She is here? Yes, she's here. Ah. Van Alden looked at him curiously. He rang the bell, and a messenger was dispatched to find Mason. Poirot greeted her with his usual politeness, which was never without effect on that particular class. Good afternoon, mademoiselle, he said cheerfully. Be seated, will you not, if monsieur permits? Yes, yes, sit down, my girl, said Van Alden. Thank you, sir, said Mason primly, and she sat down on the extreme edge of a chair. She looked bonier and more acid than ever. I have come to ask you yet more questions, said Poirot. We must get to the bottom of this affair. Always I return to the question of the man in the train. You have been shown the Comte de la Roche. You say that it is possible he was the man, but you are not sure. As I told you, sir, I never saw the gentleman's face. That is what makes it so difficult. Poirot beamed and nodded. Precisely, exactly. I comprehend well the difficulty. Now, mademoiselle, you have been in the service of Madame Kettering 2 months, you say. During that time, how often did you see your master? Mason reflected a minute or two, and then said, Only twice, sir. And was that near to, or far away? Well, once, sir, he came to Curzon Street. I was upstairs, and I looked over the banisters and saw him in the hall below. I was a bit curious-like, you understand, knowing the way things, were. Mason finished up with her discreet cough. And the other time? I was in the park, sir, with Annie, one of the housemaids, sir, and she pointed out the master to me walking with a foreign lady. Again Poirot nodded. Now listen, Mason, this man whom you saw in the carriage talking to your mistress at the Gare de Lyon, how do you know it was not your master? The master, sir? Oh, I don't think it could have been. But you are not sure, Poirot persisted. Well, I never thought of it, sir. Mason was clearly upset at the idea. You have heard that your master was also on the train. What more natural than that it should be he who came along the corridor? But the gentleman who was talking to the mistress must have come from outside, sir. He was dressed for the street. In an overcoat and soft hat. Just so, mademoiselle, I'd reflect a minute. The train has just arrived at the Gare de Lyon. Many of the passengers promenade themselves upon the quay. Your mistress was about to do so, and for that purpose had doubtless put on her fur coat, eh? Yes, sir, agreed Mason. Your master, then, does the same. The train is heated, but outside in the station it is cold. He puts on his overcoat and his hat and he walks along beside the train, and looking up at the lighted windows he suddenly sees Madame Kettering. Until then he has had no idea that she was on the train. Naturally, he mounts the carriage and goes to her compartment. She gives an exclamation of surprise at seeing him and quickly shuts the door between the 2 compartments, since it is possible that their conversation may be of a private nature. He leaned back in his chair and watched the suggestion slowly take effect. No one knew better than Hercule Poirot that the class to which Mason belongs cannot be hurried. He must give her time to get rid of her own preconceived ideas. At the end of 3 minutes she spoke. Well, of course, sir, it might be so. I never thought of it that way. The master is tall and dark, and just about that build. It was seeing the hat and coat that made me say it was a gentleman from outside. Yes, it might have been the master. I would not like to say either way, I am sure. Thank you very much, mademoiselle. I shall not require you any further. Just one thing more. He took from his pocket the cigarette case he had already shown to Catherine. Is that your mistress's case? He said to Mason. No, sir, it is not the mistress's at least. She looked suddenly startled. An idea was clearly working its way to the forefront of her mind. Yes, said Poirot encouragingly. I think, sir, I can't be sure, but I think it is a case that the mistress bought to give to the master. Said Poirot in a noncommittal manner. But whether she ever did give it to him or not, I can't say, of course. Precisely, said Poirot, precisely. That is all, I think, mademoiselle. I wish you good afternoon. Ada Mason retired discreetly, closing the door noiselessly behind her. Poirot looked across at Van Alden, a faint smile upon his face. The millionaire looked thunderstruck. You think it was Derek? He queried, but everything points the other way. Why, the Count has actually been caught red-handed with the jewels on him. No. But you told me. What did I tell you? That story about the jewels. You showed them to me. No. Van Alden stared at him. You mean to say you didn't show them to me? No. Yesterday at the tennis? No. Are you crazy, M. Poirot, or am I? Neither of us is crazy, said the detective. You ask me a question, I answer it. You say, have I not shown you the jewels yesterday? I reply, no. What I showed you, M. Van Alden, was a first-class imitation, hardly to be distinguished except by an expert from the real ones. Chapter 24. Poirot gives advice. It took the millionaire some few minutes to take the thing in. He stared at Poirot as though dumbfounded. The little Belgian nodded at him gently. Yes, he said, it alters the position, does it not? Imitation. He leaned forward. All along, M. Poirot, you have had this idea? All along this is what you have been driving at? You never believed that the Comte de la Roche was the murderer. I have had doubts, said Poirot quietly. I said as much to you. Robbery with violence and murder. He shook his head energetically. No, it is difficult to picture. It does not harmonize with the personality of the Comte de la Roche. But you believe that he meant to steal the rubies? Certainly. There is no doubt as to that. See, I will recount to you the affair as I see it. The Comte knew of the rubies and he laid his plans accordingly. He made up a romantic story of a book he was writing, so as to induce your daughter to bring them with her. He provided himself with an exact duplicate. It is clear, is it not, that substitution is what he was after. Madam, your daughter, was not an expert on jewels. It would probably be a long time before she discovered what had occurred. When she did so, well, I do not think she would prosecute the Comte. Too much would come out. He would have in his possession various letters of hers. Oh yes, a very safe scheme from the Comte's point of view, one that he has probably carried out before. It seems clear enough, yes, said Van Alden musingly. It accords with the personality of the Comte de la Roche, said Poirot. Yes, but now Van Alden looked searchingly at the other. What actually happened? Tell me that, M. Poirot. Poirot shrugged his shoulders. It is quite simple, he said. Someone stepped in ahead of the Comte. There was a long pause. Van Alden seemed to be turning things over in his mind. When he spoke, it was without beating about the bush. How long have you suspected my son-in-law, M. Poirot? From the very first. He had the motive and the opportunity. Everyone took for granted that the man in Madame's compartment in Paris was the Comte de la Roche. I thought so, too. Then you happened to mention that you had once mistaken the Comte for your son-in-law. That told me that they were of the same height and build, and alike in colouring. It put some curious ideas in my head. The maid had only been with your daughter a short time. It was unlikely that she would know Mr. Kettering well by sight, since he had not been living in Curzon Street. Also, the man was careful to keep his face turned away. You believe he murdered her, said Van Alden hoarsely. Poirot raised a hand quickly. No, I did not say that, but it is a possibility, a very strong possibility. He was in a tight corner, a very tight corner, threatened with ruin. This was the one way out. But why take the jewels? To make the crime appear an ordinary one committed by train robbers. Otherwise suspicion might have fallen on him straight away. If that is so, what has he done with the rubies? That remains to be seen. There are several possibilities. There is a man in Nice who may be able to help, the man I pointed out at the tennis. He rose to his feet and Van Alden rose also and laid his hand on the little man's shoulder. His voice when he spoke was harsh with emotion. Find Ruth's murderer for me, he said, that is all I ask. Poirot drew himself up. Leave it in the hands of Hercule Poirot, he said superbly, have no fears. I will discover the truth. He brushed a speck of fluff from his hat, smiled reassuringly at the millionaire, and left the room. Nevertheless, as he went down the stairs, some of the confidence faded from his face. It is all very well, he murmured to himself, but there are difficulties. Yes, there are great difficulties. As he was passing out of the hotel, he came to a sudden halt. A car had drawn up in front of the door. In it was Catherine Gray, and Derek Kettering was standing beside it talking to her earnestly. A minute or two later the car drove off and Derek remained standing on the pavement looking after it. The expression on his face was an odd one. He gave a sudden impatient gesture of the shoulders, sighed deeply, and turned to find Hercule Poirot standing at his elbow. In spite of himself he started. The two men looked at each other. Poirot steadily and unwaveringly, and Derek with a kind of light-hearted defiance. There was a sneer behind the easy mockery of his tone when he spoke, raising his eyebrows slightly as he did so. "Rather a dear, isn't she?" he asked easily. His manner was perfectly natural. "Yes," said Poirot thoughtfully, "that describes Mademoiselle Catherine very well. It is very English, that phrase there, and Mademoiselle Catherine, she also is very English." Derek remained perfectly still without answering. "And yet she is sympathique, is it not so?" "Yes," said Derek, "there are not many like her." He spoke softly, almost as though to himself. Poirot nodded significantly, then he leant towards the other and spoke in a different tone, a quiet, grave tone that was new to Derek Kettering. "You will pardon an old man, monsieur, if he says to you something that you may consider impertinent. There is one of your English proverbs that I would quote to you. It says that it is well to be off with the old love, before being on with the new." Kettering turned on him angrily. "What the devil do you mean?" "You enrage yourself at me," said Poirot placidly. "I expected as much. As to what I mean, monsieur, that there is a second car with a lady in it. If you turn your head you will see her." Derek spun round. His face darkened with anger. "Mirelle, damn her!" he muttered. "I will soon." Poirot arrested the movement he was about to make. "Is it wise what you are about to do there?" he asked warningly. His eyes shone softly with a green light in them. But Derek was past noticing the warning signs. In his anger he was completely off his guard. "I have broken with her utterly, and she knows it," cried Derek angrily. "You have broken with her, yes, but has she broken with you?" Derek gave a sudden harsh laugh. "She won't break with £2 million if she can help it," he murmured brutally. "Trust Mirelle for that." Poirot raised his eyebrows. "You have the outlook cynical," he murmured. "Have I?" There was no mirth in his sudden wide smile. "I have lived in the world long enough, M. Poirot, to know that all women are pretty much alike." His face softened suddenly. "All save one." He met Poirot's gaze defiantly. A look of alertness crept into his eyes, then faded again. "That one," he said, and jerked his head in the direction of Cap Martin. "Ah," said Poirot. This quiescence was well calculated to provoke the impetuous temperament of the other. "I know what you are going to say," said Derek rapidly, "the kind of life I have led, the fact that I am not worthy of her. You will say that I have no right to think even of such a thing. You will say that it is not a case of giving a dog a bad name. I know that it is not decent to be speaking like this with my wife dead only a few days, and murdered at that." He paused for breath, and Poirot took advantage of the pause to remark in his plaintive tone. "But, indeed, I have not said anything at all." "But you will." "Eh?" said Poirot. "You will say that I have no earthly chance of marrying Catherine." "No," said Poirot, "I would not say that. Your reputation is bad, yes, but with women never does that deter them. If you were a man of excellent character, of strict morality who had done nothing that he should not do, and possibly everything that he should do bien, then I should have grave doubts of your success. Moral worth, you understand, it is not romantic, it is appreciated, however, by widows." Derek Kettering stared at him, then he swung round on his heel and went up to the waiting car. Poirot looked after him with some interest. He saw the lovely vision lean out of the car and speak. Derek Kettering did not stop. He lifted his hat and passed straight on. "Ça y est," said M. Hercule Poirot, "it is time, I think, that I return chez moi." He found the imperturbable George pressing trousers. "A pleasant day, George's, somewhat fatiguing, but not without interest," he said. George received these remarks in his usual wooden fashion. Indeed, sir, the personality of a criminal, George's, is an interesting matter. Many murderers are men of great personal charm. I always heard, sir, that Dr. Crippen was a pleasant-spoken gentleman. And yet he cut up his wife like so much mincemeat. Your instances are always apt, George's. The valet did not reply, and at that moment the telephone rang. Poirot took up the receiver. Allo, yes, it is Hercule Poirot who speaks. This is Knighton. Will you hold the line a minute, M. Poirot? Mr. Van Alden would like to speak to you. There was a moment's pause, then the millionaire's voice came through. Is that you, M. Poirot? I just wanted to tell you that Mason came to me now of her own accord. She has been thinking it over, and she says that she is almost certain that the man at Paris was Derek Kettering. There was something familiar about him at the time, she says, but at the minute she could not place it. She seems pretty certain now. Ah, said Poirot, thank you, M. Van Alden. That advances us. He replaced the receiver, and stood for a minute or two with a very curious smile on his face. George had to speak to him twice before obtaining an answer. Eh? Said Poirot. What is that you say to me? Are you lunching here, sir, or are you going out? Neither, said Poirot. I shall go to bed and take a tisane. The expected has happened, and when the expected happens, it always causes me emotion. Chapter 25 Defiance. As Derek Kettering passed the car, Morel leant out. Derek, I must speak to you for a moment. But, lifting his hat, Derek passed straight on without stopping. When he got back to his hotel, the concierge detached himself from his wooden pen and accosted him. A gentleman is waiting to see you, monsieur. Who is it? Asked Derek. He did not give me his name, monsieur, but he said his business with you was important, and that he would wait. Where is he? In the little salon, monsieur. He preferred it to the lounge, he said, as being more private. Derek nodded, and turned his steps in that direction. The small salon was empty except for the visitor, who rose and bowed with easy foreign grace as Derek entered. As it chanced, Derek had seen the Comte de la Roche only once, but found no difficulty in recognizing that aristocratic nobleman, and he frowned angrily. Of all the consummate impertinence! The Comte de la Roche, is it not? He said. I am afraid you have wasted your time in coming here. I hope not, said the Comte agreeably. His white teeth glittered. The Comte's charm of manner was usually wasted on his own sex. All men, without exception, disliked him heartily. Derek Kettering was already conscious of a distinct longing to kick the Count bodily out of the room. It was only the realization that scandal would be unfortunate just at present that restrained him. He marveled anew that Ruth could have cared, as she certainly had, for this fellow. A bounder, and worse than a bounder. He looked with distaste at the Count's exquisitely manicured hands. I called, said the Comte, on a little matter of business. It would be advisable, I think, for you to listen to me. Again Derek felt strongly tempted to kick him out, but again he refrained. The hint of a threat was not lost upon him, but he interpreted it in his own way. There were various reasons why it would be better to hear what the Comte had to say. He sat down and drummed impatiently with his fingers on the table. Well, he said sharply, what is it? It was not the Comte's way to come out into the open at once. Allow me, monsieur, to offer you my condolences on your recent bereavement. If I have any impertinence from you, said Derek quietly, you go out by that window. He nodded his head towards the window beside the Comte, and the latter moved uneasily. I will send my friends to you, monsieur, if that is what you desire, he said haughtily. Derek laughed. A duel, eh? My dear Count, I don't take you seriously enough for that. But I should take a good deal of pleasure in kicking you down the Promenade des Anglais. The Comte was not at all anxious to take offense. He merely raised his eyebrows and murmured. The English are barbarians. Well, said Derek, What is it you have to say to me? I will be frank, said the Comte, I will come immediately to the point. That will suit us both, will it not? Again he smiled in his agreeable fashion. Go on, said Derek curtly. The Comte looked at the ceiling, joined the tips of his fingers together, and murmured softly. You have come into a lot of money, monsieur. What the devil has that got to do with you? The Comte drew himself up. Monsieur, my name is tarnished. I am suspected, accused of foul crime. The accusation does not come from me, said Derek coldly. As an interested party I have not expressed any opinion. I am innocent, said the Comte, I swear before heaven. He raised his hand to heaven that I am innocent. Carriages, I believe, the juge d'instruction in charge of the case, hinted Derek politely. The Comte took no notice. Not only am I unjustly suspected of a crime that I did not commit, but I am also in serious need of money. He coughed softly and suggestively. Derek rose to his feet. I was waiting for that, he said softly, you blackmailing brute. I will not give you a penny. My wife is dead, and no scandal that you can make can touch her now. She wrote you foolish letters, I dare say. If I were to buy them from you for a round sum at this minute, I am pretty certain that you would manage to keep one or two back, and I will tell you this, M. de la Roche, blackmailing is an ugly word both in England and in France. That is my answer to you. Good afternoon. One moment the Comte stretched out a hand as Derek was turning to leave the room. You are mistaken, monsieur. You are completely mistaken. I am, I hope, a gentleman. Derek laughed. Any letters that a lady might write to me I should hold sacred. He flung back his head with a beautiful air of nobility. The proposition that I was putting before you was of quite a different nature. I am, as I said, extremely short of money, and my conscience might impel me to go to the police with certain information. Derek came slowly back into the room. What do you mean? The Comte's agreeable smile flashed forth once more. Surely it is not necessary to go into details, he purred. Seek whom the crime benefits, they say, don't they? As I said just now, you have come into a lot of money lately. Derek laughed. If that is all, he said contemptuously. But the Comte was shaking his head. But it is not all, my dear sir. I should not come to you unless I had much more precise and detailed information than that. It is not agreeable, monsieur, to be arrested and tried for murder. Derek came close up to him. His face expressed such furious anger that involuntarily the Comte drew back a pace or two. Are you threatening me? The young man demanded angrily. You shall hear nothing more of the matter, the Comte assured him. Of all the colossal bluffs that I have ever struck. The Comte raised a white hand. You are wrong. It is not a bluff. To convince you I will tell you this. My information was obtained from a certain lady. It is she who holds the irrefutable proof that you committed the murder. She? Who? Mademoiselle Morel. Derek drew back as though struck. Morel, he muttered. The Comte was quick to press what he took to be his advantage. A bagatelle of 100,000 francs, he said. I ask no more. Eh? Said Derek absently. I was saying, monsieur, that a bagatelle of 100,000 francs would satisfy my conscience. Derek seemed to recollect himself. He looked earnestly at the Comte. You would like my answer now? If you please, monsieur. Then here it is. You can go to the devil. See? Leaving the Comte too astonished to speak, Derek turned on his heel and swung out of the room. Once out of the hotel he hailed a taxi and drove to Morel's hotel. On inquiring, he learned that the dancer had just come in. Derek gave the concierge his card. Take this up to mademoiselle and ask if she will see me. A very brief interval elapsed, and then Derek was bidden to follow a chasseur. A wave of exotic perfume assailed Derek's nostrils as he stepped over the threshold of the dancer's apartments. The room was filled with carnations, orchids, and mimosa. Mireille was standing by the window in a peignoir of foamy lace. She came towards him, her hands outstretched. "Deric, you have come to me. I knew you would." He put aside the clinging arms and looked down on her sternly. "Why did you send the Comte de la Roche to me?" She looked at him in astonishment, which he took to be genuine. "I? Send the Comte de la Roche to you? But for what?" "Apparently for blackmail," said Deric grimly. Again she stared. Then suddenly she smiled and nodded her head. "Of course. It was to be expected. It is what he would do, C-type la. I might have known it. No, indeed, Deric, I did not send him." He looked at her piercingly, as though seeking to read her mind. "I will tell you," said Mireille. "I am ashamed, but I will tell you. The other day, you comprehend, I was mad with rage, quite mad." She made an eloquent gesture. "My temperament, it is not a patient one. I want to be revenged on you, and so I go to the Comte de la Roche, and I tell him to go to the police and say so and so, and so and so. But have no fear, Deric. Not completely did I lose my head, the proof rests with me alone. The police can do nothing without my word, you understand. And now. She nestled up close to him, looking up at him with melting eyes. He thrust her roughly away from him. She stood there, her breast heaving, her eyes narrowing to a cat-like slit. "Be careful, Deric, be very careful. You have come back to me, have you not?" "I shall never come back to you," said Deric steadily. "Ah." More than ever the dancer looked like a cat. Her eyelids flickered. "So there is another woman? The one with whom you lunched that day? Eh? Am I right? I intend to ask that lady to marry me. You might as well know. That prim Englishwoman. Do you think that I will support that for one moment? Ah, no." Her beautiful lithe body quivered. "Listen, Deric, do you remember that conversation we had in London? You said the only thing that could save you was the death of your wife. You regretted that she was so healthy. Then the idea of an accident came to your brain. And more than an accident. I suppose," said Deric contemptuously, "that it was this conversation that you repeated to the Comte de la Roche." Mireille laughed. "Am I a fool? Could the police do anything with a vague story like that? See, I will give you a last chance. You shall give up this Englishwoman. You shall return to me. And then, chérie, never will I breathe." "Breathe what?" She laughed softly. "You thought no one saw you." "What do you mean?" "As I say, you thought no one saw you, but I saw you, Deric, mon ami. I saw you coming out of the compartment of Madame your wife just before the train got into Lyons that night. And I know more than that. I know that when you came out of her compartment she was dead." He stared at her. Then, like a man in a dream, he turned very slowly and went out of the room, swaying slightly as he walked. Chapter 26 A Warning. "And so it is," said Poirot, "that we are the good friends and have no secrets from each other." Catherine turned her head to look at him. There was something in his voice, some undercurrent of seriousness, which she had not heard before. They were sitting in the gardens of Monte Carlo. Catherine had come over with her friends, and they had run into Knighton and Poirot almost immediately on arrival. Lady Tamplin had seized upon Knighton and had overwhelmed him with reminiscences, most of which Catherine had a faint suspicion were invented. They had moved away together, Lady Tamplin with her hand on the young man's arm. Knighton had thrown a couple of glances back over his shoulder, and Poirot's eyes twinkled a little as he saw them. "Of course we are friends," said Catherine. "From the beginning we have been sympathetic to each other," mused Poirot. "When you told me that a Roman policier occurs in real life. And I was right, was I not?" He challenged her, with an emphatic forefinger. "Here we are, plunged in the middle of one. That is natural for me, it is my métier, but for you it is different. Yes," he added in a reflective tone, "for you it is different." She looked sharply at him. It was as though he were warning her, pointing out to her some menace that she had not seen. "Why do you say that I am in the middle of it? It is true that I had that conversation with Mrs. Kettering just before she died, but now all that is over. I am not connected with the case any more. Ah, mademoiselle, can we ever say, I have finished with this or that? Catherine turned defiantly round to face him. What is it? She asked. You are trying to tell me something to convey it to me rather. But I am not clever at taking hints. I would much rather that you said anything you have to say straight out. Poirot looked at her sadly. Ah, mais c'est anglais ça, he murmured, everything in black and white, everything clear-cut and well-defined. But life, it is not like that, mademoiselle. There are the things that are not yet, but which cast their shadow before. He dabbed his brow with a very large silk pocket handkerchief and murmured. Ah, but it is that I become poetical. Let us, as you say, speak only of facts. And, speaking of facts, tell me what you think of Major Knighton. I like him very much indeed, said Catherine warmly, he is quite delightful. Poirot sighed. What is the matter? Asked Catherine. You reply so heartily, said Poirot. If you had said in an indifferent voice, oh, quite nice, eh bien, do you know I should have been better pleased? Catherine did not answer. She felt slightly uncomfortable. Poirot went on dreamily. And yet, who knows? With les femmes, they have so many ways of concealing what they feel, and heartiness is perhaps as good a way as any other. He sighed. I don't see, began Catherine. He interrupted her. You do not see why I am being so impertinent, mademoiselle? I am an old man, and now and then not very often I come across someone whose welfare is dear to me. We are friends, mademoiselle. You have said so yourself. And it is just this I should like to see you happy. Catherine stared very straight in front of her. She had a cretonne sunshade with her, and with its point she traced little designs in the gravel at her feet. I have asked you a question about Major Knighton, now I will ask you another. Do you like Mr. Derek Kettering? I hardly know him, said Catherine. That is not an answer, that. I think it is. He looked at her, struck by something in her tone. Then he nodded his head gravely and slowly. Perhaps you are right, mademoiselle. See you, I who speak to you have seen much of the world, and I know that there are two things which are true. A good man may be ruined by his love for a bad woman, but the other way holds good also. A bad man may equally be ruined by his love for a good woman. Catherine looked up sharply. When you say ruined, I mean from his point of view. One must be wholehearted in crime as in everything else. You are trying to warn me, said Catherine in a low voice. Against whom? I cannot look into your heart, mademoiselle. I do not think you would let me if I could. I will just say this. There are men who have a strange fascination for women. The Comte de la Roche, said Catherine, with a smile. There are others more dangerous than the Comte de la Roche. They have qualities that appeal: recklessness, daring, audacity. You are fascinated, mademoiselle, I see that, but I think that it is no more than that. I hope so. This man of whom I speak, the emotion he feels is genuine enough, but all the same. Yes? He got up and stood looking down at her. Then he spoke, in a low, distinct voice. You could, perhaps, love a thief, mademoiselle, but not a murderer. He wheeled sharply away on that and left her sitting there. He heard the little gasp she gave and paid no attention. He had said what he meant to say. He left her there to digest that last unmistakable phrase. Derek Kettering, coming out of the casino into the sunshine, saw her sitting alone on the bench and joined her. I have been gambling, he said, with a light laugh, gambling unsuccessfully. I have lost everything, that is, that I have with me. Catherine looked at him with a troubled face. She was aware at once of something new in his manner, some hidden excitement that betrayed itself in 100 different infinitesimal signs. I should think you were always a gambler. The spirit of gambling appeals to you. Every day and in every way a gambler? You are about right. Don't you find something stimulating in it? To risk all on one throw, there is nothing like it. Calm and stolid as she believed herself to be, Catherine felt a faint answering thrill. "I want to talk to you," went on Derek, "and who knows when I may have another opportunity? There is an idea going about that I murdered my wife. No, please don't interrupt. It is absurd, of course." He paused for a minute or two, then went on, speaking more deliberately. "In dealing with the police and local authorities here, I have had to pretend to a certain decency. I prefer not to pretend with you. I meant to marry money. I was on the lookout for money when I first met Ruth Van Alden. She had the look of a slim Madonna about her, and I made all sorts of good resolutions and was bitterly disillusioned. My wife was in love with another man when she married me. She never cared for me in the least. Oh, I am not complaining, the thing was a perfectly respectable bargain. She wanted Lecanbury and I wanted money. The trouble arose simply through Ruth's American blood. Without caring a pin for me, she would have liked me to be continually dancing attendance. Time and again she as good as told me that she had bought me and that I belonged to her. The result was that I behaved abominably to her. My father-in-law will tell you that, and he is quite right. At the time of Ruth's death, I was faced with absolute disaster." He laughed suddenly. "One is faced with absolute disaster when one is up against a man like Rufus Van Alden." "And then?" asked Catherine in a low voice. "And then," Derek shrugged his shoulders, "Ruth was murdered very providentially." He laughed, and the sound of his laugh hurt Catherine. She winced. "Yes," said Derek, "that wasn't in very good taste. But it is quite true. Now I am going to tell you something more. From the very first moment I saw you, I knew you were the only woman in the world for me. I was afraid of you. I thought you might bring me bad luck." "Bad luck?" said Catherine sharply. He stared at her. "Why do you repeat it like that? What have you got in your mind?" "I was thinking of things that people have said to me." Derek grinned suddenly. "They will say a lot to you about me, my dear, and most of it will be true. Yes, and worse things too, things that I shall never tell you. I have been a gambler always and I have taken some long odds. I shan't confess to you now or at any other time. The past is done with. There is one thing I do wish you to believe. I swear to you solemnly that I did not kill my wife." He said the words earnestly enough, yet there was somehow a theatrical touch about them. He met her troubled gaze and went on. "I know. I lied the other day. It was my wife's compartment I went into." "Ah," said Catherine. "It's difficult to explain just why I went in, but I'll try. I did it on an impulse. You see, I was more or less spying on my wife. I kept out of sight on the train. Mireille had told me that my wife was meeting the Comte de la Roche in Paris. Well, as far as I had seen, that was not so. I felt ashamed, and I thought suddenly that it would be a good thing to have it out with her once and for all, so I pushed open the door and went in." He paused. "Yes," said Catherine gently. "Ruth was lying on the bunk asleep. Her face was turned away from me. I could see only the back of her head. I could have waked her up, of course. But suddenly I felt a reaction. What, after all, was there to say that we hadn't both of us said 100 times before? She looked so peaceful lying there. I left the compartment as quietly as I could." "Why lie about it to the police?" asked Catherine. "Because I'm not a complete fool. I've realized from the beginning that, from the point of view of motive, I'm the ideal murderer. If I once admitted that I had been in her compartment just before she was murdered, I'd do for myself once and for all." "I see." Did she see? She could not have told herself. She was feeling the magnetic attraction of Derek's personality, but there was something in her that resisted, that held back. "Catherine. You know that I care for you. Do you care for me?" I don't know." Weakness there. Either she knew or she did not know. If only. She cast a look round desperately as though seeking something that would help her. A soft color rose in her cheeks as a tall fair man with a limp came hurrying along the path towards them. "Major Knighton." There was relief and an unexpected warmth in her voice as she greeted him. Derek stood up scowling, his face black as a thundercloud. "Lady Tamplin having a flutter?" he said easily. "I must join her and give her the benefit of my system." He swung round on his heel and left them together. Catherine sat down again. Her heart was beating rapidly and unevenly, but as she sat there talking commonplaces to the quiet, rather shy man beside her, her self-command came back. Then she realized with a shock that Knighton also was laying bare his heart, much as Derek had done, but in a very different manner. He was shy and stammering. The words came haltingly with no eloquence to back them.
"From the first moment I saw you I ought not to have spoken so soon, but Mr. Van Alden may leave here any day, and I might not have another chance."
"I know you can't care for me so soon, that is impossible. I dare say it is presumption anyway on my part. I have private means, but not very much. No, please don't answer now. I know what your answer would be. But in case I went away suddenly, I just wanted you to know that I care." She was shaken, touched. His manner was so gentle and appealing. "There's one thing more. I just wanted to say that if you are ever in trouble, anything that I can do." He took her hand in his, held it tightly for a minute, then dropped it and walked rapidly away towards the casino without looking back. Catherine sat perfectly still, looking after him. Derek Kettering, Richard Knighton, two men so different, so very different. There was something kind about Knighton, kind and trustworthy. As to Derek. Then suddenly Catherine had a very curious sensation. She felt that she was no longer sitting alone on the seat in the casino gardens, but that someone was standing beside her, and that someone was the dead woman, Ruth Kettering. She had a further impression that Ruth wanted badly to tell her something. The impression was so curious, so vivid, that it could not be driven away. She felt absolutely certain that the spirit of Ruth Kettering was trying to convey something of vital importance to her. The impression faded. Catherine got up, trembling a little. What was it that Ruth Kettering had wanted so badly to say? Chapter 27 Interview with Mirelle. When Knighton left Catherine, he went in search of Hercule Poirot, whom he found in the rooms, jauntily placing the minimum stake on the even numbers. As Knighton joined him, the number 33 turned up, and Poirot's stake was swept away. "Bad luck," said Knighton. "Are you going to stake again?" Poirot shook his head. "Not at present." "Do you feel the fascination of gambling?" asked Knighton curiously. "Not at roulette." Knighton shot a swift glance at him. His own face became troubled. He spoke haltingly, with a touch of deference. "I wonder, are you busy, M. Poirot? There is something I would like to ask you about." "I am at your disposal. Shall we go outside? It is pleasant in the sunshine." They strolled out together, and Knighton drew a deep breath. "I love the Riviera," he said. "I came here first 12 years ago, during the war, when I was sent to Lady Tamplin's hospital. It was like paradise, coming from Flanders to this." "It must have been," said Poirot. "How long ago the war seems now," mused Knighton. They walked on in silence for some little way. "You have something on your mind," said Poirot. Knighton looked at him in some surprise. "You are quite right," he confessed. "I don't know how you knew it, though." "It showed itself only too plainly," said Poirot dryly. "I did not know that I was so transparent." "It is my business to observe the physiognomy," the little man explained, with dignity. "I will tell you, M. Poirot. You have heard of this dancer woman Mirelle? She who is the chair Amy of M. Derek Kettering? Yes, that is the one, and, knowing this, you will understand that Mr. Van Alden is naturally prejudiced against her. She wrote to him, asking for an interview. He told me to dictate a curt refusal, which of course I did. This morning she came to the hotel and sent up her card, saying that it was urgent and vital that she should see Mr. Van Alden at once." "You interest me," said Poirot. Mr. Van Alden was furious. He told me what message to send down to her. I ventured to disagree with him. It seemed to me both likely and probable that this woman Mirelle might give us valuable information. We know that she was on the blue train, and she may have seen or heard something that it might be vital for us to know. Don't you agree with me, M. Poirot?
I do, said Poirot dryly. M. Van Alden, if I may say so, behaved exceedingly foolishly.
I am glad you take that view of the matter, said the secretary. Now I am going to tell you something, M. Poirot. So strongly did I feel the unwisdom of Mr. Van Alden's attitude that I went down privately and had an interview with the lady.
Eh bien?
The difficulty was that she insisted on seeing Mr. Van Alden himself. I softened his message as much as I possibly could. In fact, to be candid, I gave it in a very different form. I said that Mr. Van Alden was too busy to see her at present, but that she might make any communication she wished to me. That, however, she could not bring herself to do, and she left without saying anything further. But I have a strong impression, M. Poirot, that that woman knows something.
This is serious, said Poirot quietly. You know where she is staying?
Yes. Knighton mentioned the name of the hotel.
Good, said Poirot, we will go there immediately.
The secretary looked doubtful. And Mr. Van Alden? He queried doubtfully. M. Van Alden is an obstinate man, said Poirot dryly. I do not argue with obstinate men. I act in spite of them. We will go and see the lady immediately. I will tell her that you are empowered by M. Van Alden to act for him, and you will guard yourself well from contradicting me. Knighton still looked slightly doubtful, but Poirot took no notice of his hesitation. At the hotel, they were told that Mademoiselle was in, and Poirot sent up both his and Knighton's cards, with "From Mr. Van Alden" penciled upon them. Word came down that Mademoiselle Mirelle would receive them. When they were ushered into the dancers' apartments, Poirot immediately took the lead. Mademoiselle, he murmured, bowing very low, we are here on behalf of M. Van Alden. Ah. And why did he not come himself? He is indisposed, said Poirot mendaciously, the Riviera throat, it has him in its grip, but me, I am empowered to act for him, as is Major Knighton, his secretary. Unless, of course, Mademoiselle would prefer to wait a fortnight or so. If there was one thing of which Poirot was tolerably certain, it was that to a temperament such as Mirelle's the mere word wait was anathema. Eh bien, I will speak, messieurs, she cried. I have been patient. I have held my hand. And for what? That I should be insulted. Yes, insulted. Ah. Does he think to treat Mirelle like that? To throw her off like an old glove? I tell you, never has a man tired of me. Always it is I who tire of them. She paced up and down the room, her slender body trembling with rage. A small table impeded her free passage and she flung it from her into a corner, where it splintered against the wall. That is what I will do to him, she cried, and that. Picking up a glass bowl filled with lilies, she flung it into the grate, where it smashed into 100 pieces. Knighton was looking at her with cold British disapproval. He felt embarrassed and ill at ease. Poirot, on the other hand, with twinkling eyes, was thoroughly enjoying the scene. Ah, it is magnificent! He cried. It can be seen Madame has a temperament. I am an artist, said Mirelle, every artist has a temperament. I told Diric to beware, and he would not listen. She whirled round on Poirot suddenly. It is true, is it not, that he wants to marry that English miss? Poirot coughed. On ma dit, he murmured, that he adores her passionately. Mirelle came towards them. He murdered his wife, she screamed. There, now you have it. He told me beforehand that he meant to do it. He had got to an impasse suit. He took the easiest way out. You say that M. Kettering murdered his wife. Yes, yes, yes. Have I not told you so? The police, murmured Poirot, will need proof of that, statement. I tell you, I saw him come out of her compartment that night on the train. When? Asked Poirot sharply. Just before the train reached Lyons. You will swear to that, mademoiselle? It was a different Poirot who spoke now, sharp and decisive. Yes. There was a moment's silence. Mireille was panting, and her eyes, half defiant, half frightened, went from the face of one man to the other. "This is a serious matter, mademoiselle," said the detective. "You realize how serious?" "Certainly I do." "That is well," said Poirot. "Then you understand, mademoiselle, that no time must be lost. You will, perhaps, accompany us immediately to the office of the examining magistrate." Mireille was taken aback. She hesitated, but, as Poirot had foreseen, she had no loophole for escape. "Very well," she muttered. "I will fetch a coat." Left alone together, Poirot and Knighton exchanged glances. "It is necessary to act while how do you say it? The iron is hot," murmured Poirot. "She is temperamental, in an hour's time, maybe, she will repent, and she will wish to draw back. We must prevent that at all costs." Mireille reappeared, wrapped in a sand-colored velvet wrap trimmed with leopard skin. She looked not altogether unlike a leopardess, tawny and dangerous. Her eyes still flashed with anger and determination. They found M. Cohen, the examining magistrate, together. A few brief introductory words from Poirot, and Mademoiselle Mireille was courteously entreated to tell her tale. This she did in much the same words as she had done to Knighton and Poirot, though with far more soberness of manner. "This is an extraordinary story, mademoiselle," said M. Carriage slowly. He leant back in his chair, adjusted his pince-nez, and looked keenly and searchingly at the dancer through them. "You wish us to believe M. Kettering actually boasted of the crime to you beforehand?" "Yes, yes. She was too healthy," he said. "If she were to die, it must be an accident. He would arrange it all." "You are aware, mademoiselle," said M. Carriage sternly, "that you are making yourself out to be an accessory before the fact?" "Me? But not the least in the world, monsieur. Not for a moment did I take that statement seriously. Ah no, indeed. I know men, monsieur, they say many wild things. It would be an odd state of affairs if one were to take all they said au pied de la lettre." The examining magistrate raised his eyebrows. "We are to take it, then, that you regarded M. Kettering's threats as mere idle words? May I ask, mademoiselle, what made you throw up your engagements in London and come out to the Riviera?" Mireille looked at him with melting black eyes. "I wished to be with the man I loved," she said simply. "Was it so unnatural?" Poirot interpolated a question gently. "Was it, then, at M. Kettering's wish that you accompanied him to Nice?" Mireille seemed to find a little difficulty in answering this. She hesitated perceptibly before she spoke. When she did, it was with a haughty indifference of manner. "In such matters I please myself, monsieur," she said. That the answer was not an answer at all was noted by all three men. They said nothing. "When were you first convinced that M. Kettering had murdered his wife?" "As I tell you, monsieur, I saw M. Kettering come out of his wife's compartment just before the train drew into Lyons. There was a look on his face at the moment I could not understand it, a look haunted and terrible. I shall never forget it." Her voice rose shrilly, and she flung out her arms in an extravagant gesture. "Quite so," said M. Carriage. "Afterwards, when I found that Madame Kettering was dead when the train left Lyons, then I knew." "And still you did not go to the police, mademoiselle," said the commissary mildly. Mireille glanced at him superbly. She was clearly enjoying herself in the role she was playing. "Shall I betray my lover?" she asked. "Ah no, do not ask a woman to do that." "Yet now," hinted M. Now it is different. He has betrayed me. Shall I suffer that in silence?" The examining magistrate checked her. Quite so," he murmured soothingly. "And now, mademoiselle, perhaps you will read over the statement of what you have told us, see that it is correct, and sign it." Mireille wasted no time on the document. Yes, she said, "it is correct." She rose to her feet. You require me no longer, messieurs? At present, no, mademoiselle. And Deric will be arrested? At once, mademoiselle. Mireille laughed cruelly and drew her fur draperies closer about her. He should have thought of this before he insulted me, she cried. There is one little matter. Poirot coughed apologetically. Just a matter of detail. Yes? What makes you think Madame Kettering was dead when the train left Lyons? Mireille stared. But she was dead. Was she? Yes, of course. She came to an abrupt stop. Poirot was regarding her intently, and he saw the wary look that came into her eyes. I have been told so. Everybody says so. Oh, said Poirot, I was not aware that the fact had been mentioned outside the examining magistrate's office. Mireille appeared somewhat discomposed. One hears those things, she said vaguely, they get about. Somebody told me. I can't remember who it was. She moved to the door. Co sprang forward to open it for her, and as he did so, Poirot's voice rose gently once more. And the jewels? Pardon, mademoiselle. Can you tell me anything about those? The jewels? What jewels? The rubies of Catherine the Great. Since you hear so much, you must have heard of them. I know nothing about any jewels, said Mireille sharply. She went out, closing the door behind her. Co came back to his chair, the examining magistrate sighed. What a fury! He said, but diablement chic, I wonder if she is telling the truth. I think